Hi, I'm Max Matern, and I wanted to give you a quick tour of the beta version of DealerPoint. Now, you've probably already uploaded some of your information to our system, but if you haven't already, then I want to show you what you're sending over to us. This is the report. The first column, as you can see, is customer number, but that's not their phone number. We don't collect their name or their email or anything that can identify them as an individual. We simply use the unique customer identifier number that comes out of your DMS. The next thing we collect is invoice number, then date, description, which is the department that that transaction actually happened in, the sale amount, cost, and zip code, which is used for heat mapping. Now, let's look at what this turns into when we load it into DealerPoint. The first thing you may notice is that this would be average enthusiast lifecycle value. This number is really the amount of gross profit that is produced for every unit that is purchased across the entire dealership. So the average profitability across the entire store per unit purchased. Now, we use this number to identify not just the value of your customer base, but also it's used in acquisitions or buy sells of dealerships to identify if someone is buying a dealership or selling a dealership, what is that book of business really worth? Really identifying customers as an asset, just like that would be the building that you're in or the tools that you have or the staff and processes. This is a way to make sure that the most valuable thing that you're buying as a dealership is actually the customer base. And this is a way to identify the value of that particular customer base. Now, let me show you how that number is actually calculated. If I switch back over to my presentation here, the industry right now analyzes dealerships really in three ways, as if they are three totally separate businesses. There's the sales department, the parts, accessories, and clothing department, and a service department. Now, when we look at these individual departments, they all have their own income, they have their own costs, they have their own staffing and expenses, but in reality, they're all under the same roof. But there's more than just the roof that connects all three of these departments. The enthusiast, the person who buys major units and then spends money across all of the departments, those are the thing we have in common. So what we've done is taken this one report that you've provided to us and we've broken it out by the consumer. So we use that unique identifier to say each of these transactions were done by this one person. Then we can create life cycles around that particular enthusiast, hence the name Enthusiast Lifecycle Value, or the acronym ELV. Once we begin creating these little life cycles for every single customer, we can identify that average number we talked about before. So if I go back over again, we can see that the average enthusiast lifecycle value based on that calculation for this example store is $2,609. Every unit they sell produces that much in gross profit for the life cycle with that particular enthusiast. Now, that is helpful, but we really want to know more about these individual customers, not just the average, but who makes up that average. And that's where ELV benchmarks, this area really starts to come in. ELV benchmarks is really taking the same information we had before, this enthusiast lifecycle value, but sorting it by the customers. So basically, we have our highest ELV values all the way down to our lowest, and we break them into subsets. The three subsets that we break them into are the top 20%, which we call loyal customers, the middle 50%, which we call neutral customers, and the bottom 30%, which we call vulnerable customers. Now, if we were to look at this breakout of customers in a real graph of real enthusiasts from the example store we're showing here, then each of these kind of slivers of blue are all customers stacked together. And if we break them into the three subsets, we can see that loyals make up a large portion of the profitability. Now, the average number that we showed you previously, that's here. That's the average ELV value. That's what we're looking at. If we're just saying on average, how much is a customer worth? What we really want to focus on, though, is these customers. How do we understand them better? How do we serve them better? How do we make the better experience for them and give them a better version of themselves? Because if we can do that effectively, then we can increase profitability on this side, which means it's not as important that we have even more customers coming through the door. So even if our traffic is slowing, we can still be profitable by focusing on the most loyal and most engaged customers that we currently have. So let's go back over to your platform. That's what these numbers tell us. In this example store, the loyal top 20% of customers are 716 enthusiasts. They produce $5,308 worth of profitability for every unit that they purchase, considerably higher than our average enthusiast lifecycle value or average ELV. Now, the middle, which is 1,790 enthusiasts, our middle 50%, they create $2,440 worth of gross profit for every unit that they buy. And then if we go down to our bottom subset of vulnerables, the bottom 30%, which is 1,053 enthusiasts, they create $1,065 worth of gross profit. Now, this doesn't mean that these customers are not valuable and that we don't want them to come into the store. It just means that these are the customers who are buying because we've got a deal right now, or they're buying because they're further out of town and they're not coming back to your service department. They're not coming back to buy parts from you. They bought because you had the unit or you had the right price. Now, the ones we want to focus on and create more loyalty for and more value for are these customers up top, this 716 enthusiasts. So the first thing that we wanted to do was start to understand and study those customers a little bit more than we currently do now. The way we do it is with visit frequency and total lifespan. Let's start with visit frequency. Visit frequency is calculated by creating the span of every visit for every individual customer. So we can say from one purchase, let's say in parts, to another purchase in service, how long was that? How many times have they visited or done business with us? And as you can see in this example, the loyal customers have visited every 0.18 years, where it gets longer and longer as we get into neutral and vulnerable customers, which makes sense. Our loyals visit us more often. Now, if we look at total lifespan is calculated by taking the very first transaction we have with this customer and the very last transaction of the data set that we have with this customer. And when we have that span, we can say that the average loyal customer in this dealership has been there for 0.78 years from beginning to end, 0.63 for neutrals, and 0.47 for vulnerables. It's great that the loyals are there longer, but this, for this particular example dealership, seems like a very short period of time. If this was your store, then I would say it looks like we need to invest in getting customers back for their annual services and getting them to come back into the life cycle of the store so they can turn from maybe a service customer back into a major unit sale customer again. So keeping them into that life cycle. This is a very valuable set of information, but there's way more that we can learn from this. And the more dealers sign on to beta and talk to us about what they've found and what they think is valuable, the more great tools that we can build for you. This area, customer base stability, is an example of exactly that. So let me show you what I mean. If I move over to this little presentation again, I want to point out customers. So if we looked at every single person who's bought anything inside of your database and we stacked them by gross profit, so highest gross profit customer down to lowest gross profit customer, and then we compared them to enthusiasts. So let me explain quickly how enthusiasts are different than customers. Enthusiasts are major unit buyers who have spent money in other departments. The reason why we break enthusiasts out is that we didn't want the person who came in just to buy one t-shirt or the person who came in just to buy one oil filter to dilute the value of your customer base or to dilute the value of those ELVs and study of them. We wanted to focus those first calculations we showed you on the major unit buyer who spends across the departments and how much value that creates. But there's still a lot of great information that comes from the total customer base, the people who just bought oil filters because they clearly have a unit that they probably would bring in at some point, the person who bought a t-shirt they may not own yet, but they may own soon. So we still want to study and understand them. So when we created this first set of numbers, clearly we wanted to study the enthusiasts. And that's how we broke them into these three subsets of loyal, neutral, vulnerable. It's how we created the average ELV. But when we showed this to dealers, they wanted to know more. How do we use this? What do we do with it? What's it telling us? So one dealer asked us a very great question, which was, how much of my current customer base produces half of my profit? How much should I really be focusing on here? And with this particular dealer, we noticed that their number was around 6%. 6% of their profit was being created, or 6% of their customer base was creating half of their profit. So that number, because we found that so interesting, we created that on the platform as well. So you will be able to see that number for your store. Half profit contributors is 6.67%. That's 6.67% of this customer base produces half of that profit. Now, this is a pretty common number we're seeing across a lot of different stores. But we also noticed that this created another comparison number. That was a number we can compare to our ELV. And what would it mean if that number compared higher or lower to ELV? So here's what I mean. For the store that we studied, their half profit, that number was higher than their average ELV number. But some stores actually had a number that was even higher than that. It was just really their loyals, a small section of their loyals were making up half of their profitability. And some stores were much lower. So some stores were down at vulnerable, where their loyals and their neutrals and even some of their vulnerables had to be grouped together to create half of their profit. Some were right at ELV. So we figured we need to understand, what does it mean if these numbers are different from each other? What could that really tell us about what a store is doing and how a store could improve? So we took this information and we isolated just these calculations and we turned it on its side. That meant that we could now create this little dial. On the very top, we use ELV average as the pivot. So that's where the dial pivots from. And where the half of profit number lies kind of dictates where the dial is going to point. Now, if the dial is pointing in the way that it's pointing now, that's indicating that there is a much smaller grouping of customers that are creating the majority of their profit. So it's just a section of their loyals that might be creating that profitability, which leads us to believe that they're pretty volatile. If they have a service advisor who has a real bad day and upsets a couple of customers, a couple really loyal, valuable customers, then we could lose a lot of our profitability. That's what leads us to believe that this type of customer base would be more volatile. Now, we started studying stores that were going the other direction too, kind of tipping to the left. And when we studied those stores, we noticed that there was not a lot of personality in some of those locations. There weren't as many people coming back and engaging with them quite as often. And that led us to believe that there isn't something clear that creates loyalty for customers. There's no reason for them to be coming back to that dealership over and over again. So we called those stores stagnant. So now we've got this dial from stagnant to stable to volatile. Now, when we did that and we turned it into this little dial that exists on your own dashboard, we know we can tune it, we can make it a little bit better, but we want you to understand that when you look at this number, this may be able to help you understand, do I need to create more loyalty within my current customer base and create more of a personality that people want to engage with and events and things that drive that? Or do I need to diversify my customer base more and make sure that I'm not so dependent on that tiny sliver of customers? So those are just some of the numbers that we've been able to create and the tools we've been able to create based on what you, the dealer, have been asking for. We're trying to create things that you find valuable. And the more things we find valuable or you find that will increase your profitability or increase the experience for your customers, the better. Now, there are a couple other things that we can do with this data, and they start up here: sales, parts, and service. If we go to these, you can actually see the seasonality of each of your individual departments. We can see not just the count of your seasonality, but the profitability. So, when are we most profitable versus when are we busiest aren't always the same thing. So, you can turn on and off years, like we see 2020 was very strange there. Who knows why? So, we can turn that one off and see what trends looked like if we took out that one year. Now, when I go over to a department like service, service is a pretty clear one to understand. We have this red dotted line that gives us an average. This is the average number of repair orders for the past 5 years. And as that number goes up and down, we can say we are busy and we are slow. The most valuable way to measure this or to understand this is to understand the midline. Midline is the average of average. It is in every 2 week period, you are likely to have about 60 repair orders. Now, when the average line, the red dotted line, crosses the midpoint, which is the purple dotted line, that's when we're going from a slow time to a busy time. This allows us to understand when should we be staffing for, when should we be marketing for, when should we change our scheduling strategy. There's all sorts of great things we can do with this, and the more you look at it as a dealer and the more value you see in it, the better we can make this as we go along. Now, one thing I want to point out when we go back to the ELV dashboard, just to these benchmarks, I've had a lot of dealers ask me, well, who are these 716 customers? If I know who they are, I can call them, we can engage with them more. Well, in order for us to get that information, we need a lot more data. And we can't do that just through pulling reports. It's way too complicated. So, what we're doing is connecting API into your system, which means that we can get information directly out of your system and provide that back to you. This is one of the very first areas that we'll see that. We've got two here. First is KPIs, so we can see live data on what is happening in your store. And then most importantly, we can see who your customers are and how loyal they are, when their last visits were. And there's a couple other good, exciting things that will be launched when this goes live. Now, when this goes live, you will be made aware of that, but it means upgrading your plan. Your plan right now is the basic plan, which is totally free. Studying your customer base, studying your seasonality is something that you can continuously do even after this beta platform finishes. When we're just fully open to everyone, you will still have free access to this, and so will every other dealer. Professional access is when we connect to your API or to your DMS through API, and we start pulling more and more data. Now, the more data we have, the more insights we can give you, and the more tools we can create for you. And I'll talk about tools in just a little bit. Now, there is a partner opportunity. Partnership is really something that you can apply for. That is where we identify dealerships that we work closely with to understand their processes and their staffing and create tools that work specifically with them. Those are ways for us to really try out new tools using this data so we can make them available on the platform. Making them unavailable on the platform means they would be available in apps. We've created this app store so that our platform operates with open architecture. It's easier for us to change it throughout time as we create new tools and new insights. Instead of pushing some new idea down your throat and making a scheduler that we think we made the best one, so everybody now has to use it. Instead of doing that, we want to create these as individual applications that if you want to use it and add it, just come to the App Store and add it on your own. If you're not interested in that particular thing, then don't worry about it. Just don't add it. So the apps that we're creating will be things like equity mining and service scheduling and service CRMs and parts inventory management. Those are all the ones that are already scheduled to start coming out. So as we build this system and as you analyze this system more and more and start to understand what we're really going for, share it with us. Communicate. Please reach out to as much as you possibly can. The more we understand about your needs and what you're finding valuable, the better we can make this for you. And ultimately, the better we can make your employees' experience and your customers' experience. So if you have questions, you have comments, you have ideas, please reach out to me personally. My name is again is Max Matern. My email is max@dealerpoint.io. Thank you so much for watching this, and hopefully you enjoy it. Talk to you later.